Dragon Quest is the grandfather of the Japanese console RPG, an influential game series like few others, and tragically underrated in the West. At this point, I've been working my way through the entire Dragon Quest series for about a year, and I've made it all the way up to 7. Now, you might think that's 7 games, but it's actually 10, because I'm also counting all of the spin-off games, so I only have like a little more than 30 to go. Yeah, I'm a little bit in over my head. Anyway, since it's been a year, how about a little recap? Look at how far we've come, what the game's had to offer, and how this whole ordeal has impacted me. You know, just sit back, grab some snacks, and relax while I tell you all about my very own quest over the last year. Oh yeah, while I won't go into explicit detail about each story necessarily, obvious spoiler warning for the games I discuss. The first game starts us off with giving our character a name. Now, usually this wouldn't be noteworthy, but DQ1 is special in that your name determines your stat growth for the rest of the game. 2 of your stats will, depending on the characters in your name, get a bonus in early levels, but fall behind in the late game. At the end of the day though, this game really isn't that hard, so it doesn't matter that much, and we name our little hero Possum, the first of many. We are greeted by the King of Tantegel, or Radatome in the translation I'm playing, who explains to us that the evil Dragon Lord, King Dragon, has stolen the Golden Orb, kidnapped the princess, and covered the world in darkness with his hordes of monsters. We, as descendants of the legendary hero, must set out and restore peace to the realm of Alefgard. This is a very basic game. As we make our way out, we are stopped by our greatest obstacle yet, a closed door, which we have to open with the magic key we just found in one of the treasure chests. But after that, we are actually off. Which brings us to the first grinding session. So this is going to be basically 80% of the game. In between everything, we're usually grinding up at least a few levels. In a nearby cave, we find an old stone tablet where our ancestor, the legendary hero Erdrick, or Roto in fan translations, left a message to tell us that we need 3 items to reach the Dragon Lord's castle. Collecting these will be the goal for the rest of the game. And now we have finally covered all the story of this game. To fulfill our goal, we travel to all corners of the realm, finding a town in the woods, an old folk hero's tomb, a merchant town, and the ruins of a settlement destroyed by the Dragon Lord's army of monsters. Also, remember the previously mentioned magic keys we need to open doors? Want to know how we get more of them? Well, you can just buy them. However, to get to the store that sells them, you need to go to this town. Normal shops don't stock them. Instead, you need to walk around the moat surrounding the entire town. This little detail is probably the dumbest thing you could get stuck on. Anyway, when I first played this game, I got stuck on this. So now it's burnt into my brain, and luckily I didn't have any issues with it this time around. Aside from that though, most of the progression is, while slow, very straightforward. Beat the dragon, save the princess, find the items needed to move on, beat the golem, beat Mad Knight, create the most overhyped bridge ever, and then raid the castle. On my first attempt, I ran too low on MP to beat the final boss, so I went back, healed up, and tried again, having more MP at my disposal because of the levels I gained during the previous attempt. With some luck, you can beat the final boss at level 17, but more realistically, you will be around level 20 at the end. This time around, I beat the Dragon Lord at level 21. We return peace to the kingdom, make our way home, the princess forces us to marry her, and we set out to find new lands. Overall, this took me a little less than 5 hours. I consider the first Dragon Quest to be somewhat of a popcorn game. You know how people talk about blockbuster movies sometimes, calling them popcorn movies if you don't really think about them too much and you're just enjoying the action? Yeah, similar to that, you don't really need to use your brain in this game. You can just lean back, do some mindless grinding, and most importantly, it does not overstay its welcome. 100 years after the events of the first game, we witnessed the destruction of the castle of Moonbrook at the hands of monsters. Gee, the home of one of our heroes gets destroyed by the dark forces. I'm sure this won't become a recurring theme. Well, at least one of the guards makes it out alive and informs us about the fate of the kingdom. Once again, as descendants of the great hero, we need to set out and save the world from the evil priest Hargon. who totally isn't related to the Dragon Lord in any way, by the way. They just look very similar. While we set out alone at first, one of the big additions in this game is that we get party members, so our hero does not need to do everything himself anymore. Instead, he becomes a full-fledged physical attacker, while the Princess of Moonbrook, who was called Maria in my playthrough, becomes a great magic user once we free her from her dog form. And the Prince of Canuck is also there. Fittingly enough, the random name the game assigned him in my playthrough was Kuki. Once our heroes are united, we start to track down the Cult of Hargan, which turns out to be quite the task. You know how I got stuck on the magic keys in DQ1 before? Yeah, now imagine that for the entirety of a way more cryptic game. To be fair, I played a fan translation, so maybe some of the hints would have been clearer in an official version, but even without the cryptic hints, this game is way more challenging than its predecessor. Your party is not the only one that has grown, since the enemies can and will outnumber you constantly. I struggled a fair bit with the mid-game, especially after getting the ship. The world opened up so much that it was hard to figure out where I was supposed to go next. It didn't help that at one point Kuki decides that he was going to almost die, so Maria and I had to find an Yggdrasil leaf, which is found on only one tile on the entire world map, to save him and get the full party back. And if there is any kind of balancing in this game, it is definitely not done for two characters. Funnily enough, once I managed to open the path to the final area, Rindarak, or Roan in older translations, I started enjoying the game again. It was challenging for sure, but it was clear what to do, and at this point I had enough tools at my disposal that most of the fights didn't seem unfair. Most of them. Maria, run! No escape. Second chance. No escape! Fireman! Third chance! No! Maria, run! Maria, run! No escape. What is this? Okay, Maria. Guess it's on you to just defeat this guy so you can actually get... Maria, freaking hit! You can't run, you can't hit, what is this? You do 1 damage, what? Come on, Maria. What? At the very end, when you're storming Hargan's Keep, you have to beat 4 bosses, since the throne room is defended by the trio of Atlas, Belial, and Pazuzu. But we cut through them like a perfectly cooked fish fillet and confront Hargan directly. Even he isn't a problem, and we save that we're dead. Oh, that hurts. That hurts. Well, turns out that even in death, he succeeds in summoning Malroth, the evil god of destruction, who then manages to take us out. Second game in a row where we have to try the final dungeon twice, but then, finally, lower his defense again. There's the Violent Blaze. I don't like it. I don't like the Violent Blaze at all. Whoa! And just like before, we return home and everything is fine again. Thanks to the Erdrick's bloodline. Dragon Quest II is seen by many as one of the weaker entries in the series. It occupies a weird transitional space between the basic foundations of 1 and the formula that 3 would establish for the future games. Funnily enough, usually people state that the final area was the part that made them dislike this game the most, and that was my favorite part. I had way more issues with the mid-game. It for sure isn't anywhere close to my favorite, but damn if it didn't feel good to finally beat it. Whoa! Dragon Quest III begins with the birth of our hero. Our father once set out to defeat the evil archfiend Baramos, but he never returned. So, on her 16th birthday, Posma meets with the king to begin her own journey. Oh yeah, this is the first time the player character can be female, so I thought it would be cool to go that route for this playthrough. So this is Posma, our kindly hero, but the archfiend is powerful, and one mortal alone may not stand a chance. To improve our chances, we recruit the best team of mercenaries you can hire for free at Paddy's party planning place. Uzi, the gourmet martial artist, the right slime for a good time, kicking, hitting, and critting the enemies for massive damage, and a speedy little blob as well.
Double dump!
Elvi, the logical mage, guardian of dreams, and a formidable spellcaster. While her physical form is frail, her spells make more than up for it. And the glue that holds it all together. Spubs, the always alert cleric, keeping an eye on everyone and always being supportive with clutch heals and a revitalizing presence. Together, our party sets out into this completely new world. And it really is the first time we see a wholly new overworld, since Dragon Quest I's Alefgard was located in Dragon Quest II's Torland this whole time. See? Right there. This world is strongly inspired by our real world. So, from the magical kingdom of Aliahan, we move to the equivalents of Rome, Egypt, India, North America, and Japan, among others, all the while following the trail of our father's heroic deeds. The reason why we need to visit all these locations is because Baramos is hiding away in a castle surrounded by mountains. And the only way for us to cross them is to collect 6 colorful orbs, which then leads us to a Mothra reference in Antarctica, and... While not necessarily a long flight, this moment with Ramia is one of many truly magical scenes that make this game special. You get to see this wonderful world, a mirror of the many cultures our world has to offer. It reminds you of what you're fighting for. This is the world that Baramos is threatening. All of it will be lost if the Archfiend triumphs. Then, in the depths of the castle, we find him, and our fight begins. With the power we've accumulated on our travels, and knowing what's at stake, we give it our all, and finally the Archfiend falls. This, of course, means we return to Aliahan and tell the king about our triumph. Yet, something feels off. Getting back to the king, we are greeted with a victory fanfare. But soon enough, the celebration is interrupted, and the true villain shows himself. Zoma was the true mastermind, even above Baramos, and to stop him, we must travel to the mysterious dark world he calls his own. Though I have to say the funniest part about this segment of the game was how I decided to tackle it on May 27th, Dragon Quest Day, which was also when they finally, after years of silence, decided to give us information about the DQ3 HD2D remake. I swear they were just waiting for me to finish this. So let's do it. This dark world turns out to be Alefgard, the setting of the first Dragon Quest. Just way before any of that game happened. Zoma is even residing in the same place as the Dragon Lord. Here we free Rubis, the original creator goddess of Alefgard, so she can grant us her guidance and a sacred talisman. We once again create the most overhyped bridge ever and enter Zoma's citadel. We have a heartbreaking moment and face down another boss gauntlet before confronting the one behind it all. With the Orb of Light, we can expose Zoma's weakness, but still the fight is our biggest challenge yet. Uzi and Elvi go down, despite trying to hold on, but with their last power, Posma and Spubs can come out on top and save their comrades from the collapsing stronghold. However, victory comes at a price. While both worlds are now safe from the clutches of darkness, the hole connecting the two closes while we are still down here. We succeeded, but we can never see our world, Aliahan, not even our mother, ever again. Posma earns the title of Erdrick for her heroic deeds and goes on to become the ancestor of the heroes of 1 and 2. But being stranded in this strange land, there's a bittersweet taste to this ending. The underlying tragedy makes Posma's journey that much more meaningful. After Dragon Quest III established the formula, Dragon Quest IV decides to have some fun with it. We get a small prologue to introduce our hero for this game, but afterwards, we move on to a chapter-based structure in which we meet our party members, so we won't see him again for a while. In a pretty smart move, this structure is also used to slowly introduce the gameplay elements to you. Chapter 1, for example, features Ragnar Magrayan, who focuses on physical attacks, while the healing is done by Healy, who is CPU controlled, so you don't have to think about it. In Chapter 2, in which we play the best girl Tsarevna Alena of Zamaxva, and her companions Kirill and Boria, then introduces us to spellcasters, with Kirill and Boria filling the role of priest and mage respectively. Alena herself is an action girl martial artist, so fittingly this chapter leads us to a tournament arc where the King of Endor promised the hand of his daughter Veronica to the winner. If Alena wins though, she will get her out of that arrangement because Square Enix are cowards. Give this girl boss her wife and her male wife. Chapter 3 introduces us to yet another all-time best character in the series, Torneko. We'll see more of him later, but for now all you really need to know is that he's a merchant who stops a war by helping the kings of Endor and Ballimoral accept their children's feelings for one another. Finally, we get introduced to Mina and Maya. They want to avenge their father Mahabala's death at the hands of his student Balzac. Yes, that's his name. I'll give you a bit to get your laughs out. Anyway, Balzac turned into a hairy beast upon taking the secret of evolution, which he and Mahabala were researching for himself. The sisters are able to beat Balzac, but their revenge is cut short, and the chapter instead ends with them fleeing the kingdom. Which then brings us to the real meat of the game. After meeting this illustrious cast of characters, we return to our hero Possum, but just as we get settled back into our cozy village life, we find out that he's the chosen hero of Zenithian descent. Zenithian basically means heaven, but God is a dragon? It's kind of like that. And he was hidden away for that very reason. But now, Sauro's troops have found him. Gee, the home of our hero gets destroyed by the Dark Forces. I'm sure that won't be a recurring element. The next step then is recruiting the previous characters and tying up loose ends from the earlier chapters. While all of this is going on, we also collect the legendary Zenithian equipment that only the chosen hero of legend can wield. How convenient that that's us! We eventually learn about Sauro's motivations. Turns out, humans kind of suck, and have been actively hunting his elf girlfriend Rose for her ruby tears. After she gets killed, Sauro absolutely loses it and decides to give up himself to the secret of evolution in order to become the true master of all monsters. However, we follow him to the underworld Naderia with the help of the Zenithian dragon and confront him in an insanely cool boss fight that slowly has him transform into his final form by shedding his limbs piece by piece. Through perseverance, we can beat him. Which brings us to yet another bittersweet ending. While humanity is saved, we can understand sorrow to some extent. We also lost our loved ones, and there has been severe bloodshed on both sides. In the end, war means loss for everyone. Except that is not what happens. The DS version adds a 6th chapter where we can recruit Psaro and beat up Amon, who posed as his henchman but wanted to overthrow him this whole time like fucking Starscream. Psaro
is no more! I now lead the
monsters. And was also responsible for Rose's death actually, who we of course bring back from the dead with no issues. So, all's well that ends well. I'm not the biggest fan of how Chapter 6 plays out. Amon had a throwaway line about his involvement before, but the way they turned him into the final boss is noticeably tacked on. He even reuses Psaro's sprites, but goes through them faster. Playable Psaro is cool, and it pretty much comes full circle this way, since I'm reasonably sure that he was the inspiration for Magus and Chrono Trigger. But the way that all the tragedy of the original ending just gets erased feels very off. And that is it for Dragon Quest IV. By passing on the customization options of 3, we instead get a story that is more character-focused, which makes this another fan favorite in the series. And while I did enjoy it, it is not quite among my own favorites. But it gave us Alena and Torneko, so it's actually the best one. Dragon Quest V once again experiments a little with the way the story is told. This time around, we start off with our hero as the cutest little baby man who accompanies his father on a journey. After some whimsical adventures, the childhood innocence quickly fades though. When visiting a nearby kingdom, its Prince Harry gets kidnapped, and when trying to save him, we get surprised by a group of monsters called the Order of Zugzwang. We are forced to helplessly watch as our father gets brutally killed right in front of us, before we get taken away into slavery. We then follow our hero through the hardships of growing up, from breaking out of slavery to getting married, discovering the truth about his family history, taking his place on the throne of a kingdom, and even becoming a father himself. All the while, we are continuing the work that our father died to finish, looking for our mother in the hopes that she's still out there somewhere. At one point early on, we return to Wheelbrook, the village that we spent so much time in as a child, but find it in ruins. Gee, the home of our hero gets destroyed by the dark forces? I'm sure this is not going to happen ever again. In a nearby cave, we find out what our father was actually looking for this whole time. The Zenithian sword that can only be carried by the chosen hero of legend was in his possession, and he was looking for said hero to save our mother from Naderia. How convenient that that's not us. Huh. Well, we take the sword with us anyway and continue our journey. Also, a very cool thing happened here. This game has a mechanic where you can recruit monsters. It's in fact a really early example of this monster collecting style of gameplay, releasing just a few years after Megami Tensei, and even a month before Shin Megami Tensei. But I completely forgot at which point in the story you could get the wagon necessary for this. So I walked right past it and played with only Possum and Harry in my party until the game forced me to get it. This faux pas made this part of the game way harder than it needed to be. Whoops. A bit later, during our coronation, the Chancellor decides to poison everyone and monsters invade the castle. We try to save our kidnapped wife, but in turn get turned to stone ourselves. Gotha once again loses its royal couple, and we enter a second time skip. As what is basically a garden gnome, we get to watch helplessly again, as the world changes and monsters begin getting more aggressive in taking away children, until one fateful day when we are rescued by our own offspring. It turns out that our own son was fated to be the chosen hero of legend this whole time. This is something that I think is super cool about this game, and it also combines gameplay and story in a very neat way. Our protagonist not being the legendary hero after 4 games of exactly that is a fun subversion of expectations all on its own, and this difference is even reflected in the skills we learn. The player character takes on more of a support role than in previous entries, and even his ability to tame monsters implies a more nurturing side to him. Meanwhile, once he joins our party, our son, who I called Perry, learns skills that you would expect from the protagonists of 3 and 4. And obviously, he is the only one who can equip the Zenithian equipment this time around. Speaking of which, that becomes our new objective. Just as before, we need to collect the Zenithian equipment and save our wife on the way, and then go to hell, Naderia. Tragically, after all these years, reuniting with our mother, she gets struck down. Twice. Once by the villain who has been tormenting us all our life, and then again by the Grandmaster behind it all, the Archfiend Nimzo. In retaliation, we take him down and finally bring peace to the land once more. A true odyssey spanning from our protagonist's youngest years until he himself became a father comes to an end. For the 3rd time in a row, this one is yet again a fan favorite, and I completely understand why. It builds on the character-focused storytelling of 4, but puts one particular character in the limelight, showing off all the hardships he goes through. And it even introduced recruitable monsters at a time before Pokémon was a thing, which will shape the series for years to come. Whenever I get asked what my favorite Dragon Quest game is, this one is certainly up there. Remember Torneko? He's back, in rogue form. If there's one game series I've loved more as a kid than Dragon Quest, then it was Pokémon. And more than anything, I loved the Pokémon Mystery Dungeon games. Red Rescue Team and Explorers of Time were the ones I played growing up, and I later went back to check out the additional content of Explorers of Sky as well. Wonderful games, with heartfelt moments and unforgettable characters. Needless to say, I was super stoked to find out that Mystery Dungeon started as a Dragon Quest spin-off, and to check it out for myself. Now, even though it would be reasonable to assume I had high expectations based on what I said before, I don't think that's necessarily true. I was very much aware of what kind of game I was going into, and this would be way less story-focused and more roguelike than later Mystery Dungeon games. It was, after all, the first one. In case you don't know, Mystery Dungeon games are built around a very simple concept. Every time you enter a dungeon, the layout is randomly generated, exploration is turn-based, and enemies don't make a move until you do. You can pick up items to help in your trip through the dungeon, but watch out for your belly! If you become too hungry, you will start taking damage. And if you go game over, you lose all your items and have to start over. Later Mystery Dungeon games have you traversing several of these dungeons while pushing forward the story. Torneko no Daibouken, which by the way means Torneko's Great Adventure, only really has the one mysterious dungeon. Well, technically there's 3, since there's a short tutorial one, and then also a more dangerous post-game one, but for the bulk of the game, you will be entering one dungeon over and over. If you've played Pokémon Mystery Dungeon or expect RPG progression, you might be a little confused right now. Doesn't this mean that you can just grind levels and then run through with ease? But the kicker is that your level is always reset to 1 when you leave the dungeon. The only thing helping you are the items on your way, and once you unlock it, the ones you've saved in your vault from previous trips. You can only take a limited amount with you though. The goal for the main story is to retrieve an item called the Joy Chest, or Box of Happiness, from the depths of the dungeon, while collecting items to sell in your shop and earn a living for your family. Funnily enough, the game FAQs guide I found about this game told me to just get to the Joy Chest on your first try, so I thought this would be way shorter than the other games. I didn't, and it wasn't. Later enemies can pull some seriously mean tricks on you, like setting you to 1 HP, causing confusion across the entire room, or moving twice every turn. And once you find the chest, you cannot just teleport out of there. You need to make your way back to the surface as well. I think I made it to the chest 3 times, before finally also managing the trip back. But once you get to the higher floors again, it begins to feel more like a victory lap. 153 damage! So I appreciate it for that at least. It was definitely cool to see how these 2 game series that mean so much to me overlap, and how this would develop into the best Pokémon games ever. Fight me if you disagree. In some respects, it feels more like a proof of concept than a full-fledged game, but it was still a fun delve into the dungeon depths. With that short detour done, we return to the main line with quite an interesting opening. We start with a group of adventurers about to storm the Archfiend's lair on Dragonback, but getting turned to stone by the elusive monster's power before being teleported away. Our hero then wakes up in his bed in Weaver's Peak, his hometown, with his beloved sister Tanya. But on an errant trip for the annual town festival, he falls through the map right into another world. The Dragon Quest series, as you might have noticed, is no stranger to several worlds and planeswalking adventurers, but DQ6 tries something new by making you explore 2 world maps in tandem, switching between them to reach new locations, and your actions in one world having consequences in the other. Once we figure all this out, we are well on our mission to defeat the newest entry into the Archfiend Rogues Gallery, Murdaugh. We meet Carver when joining the military, get tasked with retrieving Ra's mirror to break Murdaugh's illusion magic, and then run into Millie when the seer Madame Luca tells us about the nature of these 2 worlds, with the one we hail from being the world of dreams. And somehow this party is starting to look quite familiar. We still need to find Ra's mirror for our king back in the dream world though. In the tower harboring it, we meet party member number 4, Ashlyn. She seems quite mysterious, and there could be more to her, but we'll get back to that later. For now, we return the mirror to our king, which reveals that the king we knew is actually the queen, dreaming she's the king, while the king is dreaming that he is Murdaugh, and this is all part of the real Murdaugh's convoluted evil scheme. Also, we're the Prince of Somnia, I guess. What? Huh? It's a lot, I know. But with Murdaugh's illusions finally broken, we free the king from his clutches and then visit the religious town of Ghent, to ask for their help in our battle against the real Archfiend. Their young prodigy Nevin, however, thinks himself too important to save the world, and we need actual divine intervention before he joins our party. Nevin sucks, one of my least favorite characters in the series. But we can now use their ship to sail to Murder's Keep. Here, the events of the opening sequence seem to repeat in an eerily similar fashion. And for some reason, Ashlyn decides not to join us, but we get carried to the Archfiend's stronghold by some dragon yet again. But if you've watched this far, you probably realize that even after beating Murder, this won't be the end. In fact, there are 3 more Archfiends just like him. While tracking them down, we also start collecting some legendary equipment again. Who could have seen this coming? On the way, we run into this blue swordsman a few times, save an innocent woman from a German, and unlock Ashlyn's magic burst spell when we discover her magical hometown of Sorceria. We also bring back All Trades Abbey, which introduces a vocation system kind of like DQ3, but way more in depth. Vocation mastery is tracked independently from character level, and mastering certain vocations unlocks new advanced ones. It's a really fun system to play around with. At one point, we visit the real version of Weaver's Peak, and it turns out things are quite different than they were in the dream world. But even so, I still think we can maybe add this to the counter of locations to be moonbrooked. It's also fixed as soon as we beat the boss here, but whatever. The last of the 4 Archfiends is Durin, who, unlike his comrades, seems to favor fair competition. He has turned the Cloudsgate Citadel into his abode, so collecting the legendary equipment is necessary to get to him. However, before we can fight against him, we must first beat the Citadel itself. And then Terry, the swordsman we've been running into so much. Turns out he is Millie's brother, and joined up with the forces of evil to become the strongest swordsman in the world, presumably to protect his sister. Clearly he's not the smartest guy around. But after beating Terry and Durin, the former finally joins up with us, so we can now add our final important party member into the mix, Lizzie the Hexaurus! So there was this cool scene earlier where Terry fought against a Hexaurus, and I guess after reincarnating Digimon style, the good dragon lady now has a crush on our Swordmaster, so she too jumps into the wagon, and she's honestly way more useful than Terry himself. The 4 Dread Fiends haunting the world have been taken care of, so the last thing left to do is to take the fight to the mastermind behind it all, Mortimer, the king of the Dread Realm. While fighting our way through to him, we also slowly return hope to the people trapped in the Dread Realm. The fight against Mortimer is honestly pretty cool, starting with the more frail-looking form that is still powerful enough to keep himself afloat magically, before he turns into a completely natty workout influencer.
Fuck your protein powder.
And then this. He's just breaking through the fabric of reality. This final form can be quite tricky, since his hands count as separate enemies, and they can revive each other. But of course, I'm a pro at this point, so we beat him first try. Finally, the people in the Dread Realm are freed, and the dream world can return to where it belongs, the dreams of the people, leaving behind only a familiar castle in the sky. Remember when I said we'd get back to Ashlyn's character? Yeah, it turns out we never really get full closure for a bunch of the questions this game throws at you. What even was her deal before we met her? Why was she in that tower? Her and the hero are apparently dating, but that's never really addressed. And apparently at some point she was supposed to be the dragon, but that reveal was just entirely dropped, so the dragon just comes out of nowhere? This is the biggest example for my main problem with this title. It honestly has some of the coolest moments in the series so far. The Amor plotline, where a woman's guilt over her perished lover makes the entire river run red with blood she can't wash from her hands. The fight scene between Terry and the Hexaurus, showing you his prowess with the sword long before you ever fight or recruit him. The fact that one of the bosses is a floating castle. But also, so many parts of the story feel weirdly undercooked. It starts off fine enough, but after you beat Murder, you kind of just go through the motions, just because it's tradition at this point. With this game having almost double the playtime of the previous titles, it's weird how it feels so much less complete, and so many plot threads remain unresolved. Hey, but would you look at that, the next game is a spin-off starring none other than Terry. So, will this game delve deeper into the characters that Dragon Quest VI set up? Nope, but who cares, we can recruit monsters again. Terry and Millie, or Milayu, don't ask, Dragon Quest VI was not localized at this time, are home alone late at night. But despite his sister warning him about monsters roaming at this time, Terry gets out of bed and starts exploring. It does not take long for a monster called Warubo to jump out of the drawer and drag Millie away. Before Terry can even react, yet another fluff ball called Watabo enters the room in the exact same manner. However, since this one is much more well-mannered, he converses with Terry for a bit before taking him through the drawer into the world of Great Tree. Dragon Quest Monsters does not have an epic plot like the normal games. Instead, you become a monster master, tasked with winning the Starry Night tournament for the king so he can brag. Why would you agree to do this? Well, the winner is said to be granted a wish, so you can bring your sister and yourself back home safely. The entire game then revolves around entering randomly generated dungeons through teleportals in the castle's basement, recruiting monsters, and combining them to hatch stronger ones. By fighting your way through Great Tree's arena, you can then become eligible to enter the Starry Night tournament. Also, for some reason, the kingdoms partaking in this tournament are all built inside of trees? There's Great Tree, Great Log, Dead Tree, and so on and so forth. Really weird detail to include, but I guess it's some kind of world building. In the finals of the tournament, it turns out that Millie was this powerful new monster master that the whole world was talking about. And she's also here to get back home. However, with how far you both made it, nobody wants to hold back for this final confrontation. And I lost because my monsters were not suitably leveled. Well, back into the portals we go for some grinding before trying again. Luckily, all the tournaments are declared non-canon if you lose, so we just run it back until we beat her. Dragon Quest Monsters builds upon the monster recruiting foundation of Dragon Quest V, while also cashing in on the popularity of Pokémon at the time. Probably because of the latter, this was the first Dragon Quest game to be released in Europe. Yep, up until now, even if the games had a US release, Europe didn't get them. The European English release even retained the Dragon Warrior title of the US release, while as far as I could tell, the German language version was the only game released with the Dragon Quest title in the West, until the whole series switched over with Dragon Quest VIII. And funnily enough, this whole game is filled with fan service and references to the earlier titles. Almost all the bosses behind the gates reference plot points and locations from Dragon Quest I through VI. You know, references that Europeans wouldn't get because this was the first game in the series that they even bothered to release here. Despite its simplistic gameplay loop and basically non-existent story, I still like this game a lot. The breeding system gives you a lot of room to explore. For example, this time around I went for a land owl, basically a D&D owlbear, they first appeared in Dragon Quest V, for 2 monster generations in a row, and the attack growth made both of them absolute beasts in battle. Late and post-game parties tend to go back to tried and true bombs so you can beat the harder fights, but figuring out the way to get there, that's the real fun part.
Oh shit. Here we go again.
Well, that was fun. Let's check back in with Torneko, our lovable merchant. I wonder if it was a conscious decision to go with the original Japanese name Torneko, or if they simply forgot that they called him Taloon on the NES. Either way, The Last Hope is a direct sequel to the first Torneko no Daibouken, picking up just a few months after we last saw everyone, with the box of happiness still being displayed in our shop, bringing prosperity to the town. Surely nothing could go wrong. But then, something goes wrong. First, some weird old guy visits our home, and then places all over the kingdom begin to turn into mystery dungeons without warning. You heard right, mystery dungeons. Plural. There's some actual feeling of progression in this game, thank Rubis. And not only that, but each dungeon features unique quirks and monsters to deal with. to make them more memorable. You still get set back to level 1 once you leave the dungeon, but there's many new systems in town to give you a head start. Most importantly, the new melding system to improve your equipment allows you to combine the pros of 2 weapons or shields into one piece. While you need to unlock these services on your way through the story, you will have all of them available by the time you have to return to the original magical dungeon. But let me rewind a bit. So, every time you clear one of these dungeons, you get just a little bit closer to figuring out what is causing all these weird things to happen. Finally, you capture the old man from the beginning, who seemed to know what was going on already when we first met him. As it turns out, the Box of Happiness is formed by the powers of the magical dungeon, but for balance reasons, it also creates an evil counterpart known as the Dark Evil Chest. Or Dark Evil Chest? Not even joking here. Luckily, the old guy also knows how to create a banished chest to keep the Dark Evil Chest's power sealed away. Why does everything have to be a chest again? Well, we just need 3 magical powers from around the kingdom, and would you look at that, we already collected 2 of them by pure happenstance. So, once we get the final one from the Toro Ruins, we drop off the banished chest in the depths of the original mystery dungeon. After beating the Dark Evil Chest in a weird boss fight, where hitting it once causes it to teleport around the room and vomit out a bunch of enemies. And so, peace returns to the land once more. This game actually rules. It is such a big step up from the first Mystery Dungeon game, it's honestly incredible. Having several dungeons to choose from with their own monsters and items to be found makes going back for items way more interesting, because you always have to weigh the risks. Do you go into one of the more difficult dungeons in the hopes of finding a really strong sword, or do you stick with the first few short dungeons for a while to gear up slowly before tackling those harder ones again? The story is still super simple and honestly quite goofy, like, come on. Dark Evil Chest, but it's just enough there to give you a good time. And despite reviews at the time of this game's release complaining about its difficulty, I honestly thought it was way more accessible than the first one, especially once you understand how to utilize the services in town. I've honestly become a big fan of this game, despite my playthrough being plagued by the whims of an aging controller and phantom inputs. Ah, my controller is once again going apeshit. It's really a shame that physical copies are so expensive nowadays. And of course, we're back to the games not being released in Europe. Imagine, if you will, a world covered in an endless ocean. Nothing as far as the eye can see, except for one small island in the middle of the deep blue, all alone. This island is home to our hero, a young boy from the fishing village of Pilchard Bay. His friends are Kiefer, the rebellious son of King Donald of Castle Estard, just a bit to the north, and Maribel, the tenacious daughter of the mayor. All of them, deep down, share a desire for adventure and exploring what is truly out there. One day, they stumble upon an old shrine. Completing one of the tablets inside suddenly transports them to a different island populated by monsters, a rare sight where they're from. I should probably note that this first occurrence of monsters happens hours into the game, even in the more streamlined 3DS version that I played. We get some help from the friendly warrior lady Maeve before reaching the nearby village. This is Ballymolloy, a town named after its hero Molloy, who sacrificed himself trying to save the village's women from the monster's clutches. As we learn, Molloy's demise was because the other men in town were fucking cowards who said they would help him but let him go alone. Maeve, being his younger sister, was distraught and her negative emotions were easily manipulated, turning her into one of the monsters. Once we figure all this out, Maeve explains that to return the women to the village, we need to kill her. She doesn't even really fight back. Clearly, something inside of her is telling her as well that this isn't right. What remains of her own humanity seems to be holding her back. After saving Ballymolloy, we return to the shrine, and the whole island appears back in our world as well. This establishes the gameplay loop for the next 60 to 70 hours. Collect fragments, bring them to the shrine, visit a new island, solve the local problem, bring it back into our world. Every island has its own, mostly separate story, so the structure is quite episodic. While there is an overarching plot, it slowly builds up in the background as we save more islands. After all, it is quite curious that they all have been doomed by monsters in some way and then sealed off from the rest of the world. In my opinion, Ballymolloy is a great opening chapter, really showing off the best side of this approach, building up the important characters in a short time and still making you feel for them. On another island, we meet the Roamers, a nomadic people whose mission it is to resurrect the Almighty, this world's benevolent creator god, through a ritual. That sounds neat, so we help them. And if you have played this game, you know what's coming next. The ritual fails, so the Roamer's job is not yet done. And instead of coming back with us, Kiefer decides to stay with them. Here among them, he has finally found his place in life. Of course, it is left to us to explain this to his father. Sadly, not all the islands are this strong, with my least favorite being Providence. This story mostly takes place in a village at the foot of a mountain and a church on the summit. To get from one of these locations to the other, you run through a cavernous dungeon, over and over and over and over. But surely the plot itself is at least good, so it's worth it, right? Nope, it's about as boring as they come. Monsters try to destroy a statue of the goddess that weakens them, and then you repair it, and then you beat the boss. No interesting characters, with the most interesting one having lost what made him interesting before this point in time, as we learn later. No big suspense, no twists, just cave. Plus, there's no explanation how the goddess statue even fits in with the Almighty being in charge in this world. It just messes up the cosmology, so it's better to ignore that point entirely. Between all the ups and downs of the varying islands, we find out that back in the day, Demon King Orgodemir's hordes defeated the Almighty's order, after which he sealed off all the islands to prevent the Almighty's return. But weakened from the fight, he could not finish his work entirely. The tablets, it turns out, are taking us back in time, to when the Demon King's attack on each island was at its peak. Finally, after we free all the islands and defeat Orgodemir in the past, the new generation of roamers complete the ritual and the Almighty returns to the world. We join King Donald on his first trip to visit the newly built cathedral in his honor, but something about this place seems fishy. Our suspicions are validated when the Almighty goes off the rails and several islands are sealed off again. Something is very wrong here, so we set out to awaken 4 elemental spirits to find out what's really going on. Once all of them are awakened, we reveal that the supposed Almighty was really Orgodemir in disguise. I guess he sealed himself away, while also making everyone believe that he's the Almighty, so he can be revived by the roamers, and he somehow did this after we defeated him? Honestly, the time travel aspect makes some things really confusing, so the details get a bit foggy here. Unlike our final goal, that's pretty clear. We storm Orgodemir's Cathedral of Blight and finish him off for good. The final dungeon has this really cool gimmick at the end where, based on which spirit's amulet you use, you will get another final room. My plan was to go through all of them by teleporting out of the cathedral right before the final fight and then using another spirit's amulet. So I start with the fire amulet, the first one we received. After making our way through a labyrinth of magma, we reach Orgodemir's room and evac fails. Turns out I would have had to teleport out of the room before this one. Since I didn't, there's no turning back now. We either beat him or die trying. Even though I wasn't fully prepared to fight him at this point, we managed to pull through and beat him to a pulp. 4 phases of this Timo Great David Bowie knockoff trying to hold on to a veneer of beauty get blasted through by the power of the knuckle sandwich. Peace has finally returned to the world, but for real this time. In a final scene, Possum and Maribel join the crew of Pilchard Base fishermen for a trip and find yet another stone tablet. I don't want to spoil it here, but I'm actually tearing up a little. So many parts of this game felt incredibly tedious, just stretched out for there to be more game. Islands like Providence could have been easily left out entirely. And then, right at the end, this one scene showed me the true strength of this game. Even through all this tediousness, the characters were there to get me through it. While those more annoying parts do pull my overall opinion down, the character writing made the whole adventure worth it to me. Dragon Quest has meant a lot to me ever since I first played 8 as a kid. I didn't beat it until way later, but I spent many hours just enthralled by the world and creatures presented to me by that disc in the PS2. When Dragon Quest IX was released for Nintendo DS, I was staying with my grandma during the summer, and I begged my uncle to get it for me since the release date was close to my 12th birthday. Sometime later, I even got my mom to order me a used copy of Dragon Quest Monsters for the Game Boy Color, though I paid her back from my allowance, of course. I started this giant project after Akira Toriyama passed away in March of last year, to show respect to one of the greats and honor the series that had such an impact on me as a person. His characters and monsters, combined with Yuji Horii game design and desire to represent giant, world-spanning adventures, have created such a vivid and fantastical universe that is oozing with charm, and I hope that I was able to present to you why these games are special to me. And setting out on this quest of my own just made it even more special. If I hadn't decided to stream these games, if I hadn't fallen down this rabbit hole of an interest, I wouldn't have met so many cool people from all over the world that I can now call friends. Even aside from all that, seeing how the games improved from the early archaic basics to the sprawling sagas we know now has been eye-opening. Seeing each of them come up with new twists to the formula, having their own quirks, strengths and shortcomings, recurring elements and plot ideas, it's really fascinating to me. Despite being seen as stuck in the past, old-fashioned traditionalist, Dragon Quest is not afraid to experiment. Some of these experiments work better than others, some need some refinement, but it is never standing still. Even by the year 2000, the original release of Dragon Quest VII, we've had such a breadth of experiences, some quite short, some arguably too long, some focused on one life in a big world, some were a collection of several lives brought together by fate. Some were spent crawling through dungeons, some befriending the wildlife. And this is only the beginning. There's so much more to see.